The Sun, don't call mums women. Is this one of those PC going a bit too far?
No. Well, yes and no. This is some advice from the Foreign Office, which was a response to a draft UN human rights paper. It mentioned mums in this document, and some particularly over-enthusiastic, bureaucratic Walla has said, oh, we shouldn't say mums, we should say pregnant people rather than mums. Now, that's a little bit over-enthusiastic, like I said, but I've been a pregnant person. I would be fine being called a person rather than a mum. And bear in mind, you're not a mum quite often until you actually have given birth. So when you're pregnant, you're a pregnant person, not a mum. It's difficult. But this is the kind of story that's almost so... And there's only been 2 transgender pregnancies in the UK anyway, so it's the kind of story that you kind of think, well, I can almost ignore it. It's so ridiculous.
Mark, would your better half take issue?
I wouldn't presume to speak for my better half's opinions on how she ought to be described on national television, but actually I think this story is rather more serious. Not just because, of course, you and I and all of us as taxpayers are paying for somebody in the Foreign Office to go and write such a ridiculous note to the United Nations, which is not a great sign that all of their time is being
tiny unnoticed paper by someone who's probably on blimmin' minimum wage.
Sorry,
yeah,
Foreign Office.
I
don't buy that Foreign Office.
It's not the Secretary.
Those people at the Foreign Office who are corresponding with the United Nations on human rights memos are, I would guess, not sitting there on minimum wage doing it. But nonetheless, actually, I think this could be is more generally damaging. You remember a few years ago, all those stories you used to hear saying Christmas is being banned by a council because they don't want to offend Muslims. It wasn't Britain's Muslim population asking for that to happen. It was overzealous, often obsessive public officials going way too far, and actually they ended up harming community relations by creating these myths and feeding people's concerns and paranoia about things.
But this isn't saying we're going to ignore mums. We're not going to have pregnant mums anymore. It's just saying pregnant people.
I'm not saying it's actually going to do that, but what I am saying is it's going to be picked up on by a variety of different people who want to use it for their own ends. And actually, as far as I'm aware, there aren't British trans people out there demanding for this change to be enforced on everybody.
It's not.
I think it's an absurdity from, unfortunately, you and I funding an overzealous public official doing something which is actually overall, A, pretty stupid, and B, on balance, harmful.
Let's move on to the stories on the front page of the Metro. Yes, however, clinics, what's this one about?
Yeah, it's kind of like the other side of that Sun story that we were talking about before the break, saying that, the Foreign Office was coming in for criticism because it said we need to start, talking about trans mums rather than just normal mums, as it were. The Mirror's reporting that 50 kids a week have been sent to these sex change clinics. Some of them are as young as just 4. And actually, if you just read the headline, you go, crikey, 50 children a week, this is a massive increase on what you've had before. 4-year-olds don't know what gender they are or what gender they want to be. This is ridiculous. But you read the story and start reading into actually what is involved here. The doctors in charge are saying many of these children have very mild problems, and most of them do get over it. They resolve it, and they go through puberty in the normal fashion. They decide that they're all right in the body they're in. The number of people referred to this particular clinic is only 1,302. That's a tiny, tiny proportion of the British population, although it has increased. And you've got to bear in mind that some people who are trans have a 45% risk of attempting suicide. And that is, the general population is 4.6%. You're 10 times more likely to try to kill yourself. 8 in 10 trans people will self-harm. If that is your child, and they have persistently and regularly and consistently said, I have a problem here, I'm really unhappy, I think as a responsible parent, you do what they're doing here. You take them to a doctor and see if there's an issue.
Mark, you have a young son. If he came to you in a few years' time to say, Daddy, I feel like a girl, I want to wear girls' clothing, would you be happy with that? Yeah. Or would you accept that?
Firstly, loads of kids do that, and loads of kids do that without ending up being turning out to actually be trans people or having gender dysphoria. Loads of kids do that, and I think that's something which British society has become a lot more understanding of over the decades, and particularly in recent years. I think I agree with Susie to the degree that people have also started to realise that it is really important that where people are in severe mental distress about issues like this, that there is proper treatment and support and assistance available. I think what will raise a lot of people's eyebrows about this is the question of taking children who are 4 or 5 to a clinical illness. I wonder how many children out there actually do say, you know what, I'm a girl or I'm
It's
a boy.
50 a week.
Well, actually, it's a lot more than that. And I would argue that at one point or another, most children will at some point think about these topics.
It was the parents that are taking them to the clinic, Mark.
Indeed.
It's not like a teacher going, oh, there's a kiddie in a dress, let's send them all off to a clinic. This is their parents, people who know that child better than anybody else, and who obviously are not, one presumes, going to dash them to the doctor the moment they decide to wear a pink feather boa out of the dressing up box. They're actually going to wait until there is a persistent, regular problem that a parent would identify. There is an issue. My child seems very, very distressed or unhappy. Perhaps they've looked into it and they've seen the statistics and the figures of how serious this can be if your child is one of the very few people who are going to have a trans issue.
As long as no parents ever made a bad decision for their own interests.
Of course we do. But I think it's better that people go and see a doctor and get the right diagnosis, if there is one. And if the doctor, who is an expert, says, your kid's not trans, it's absolutely fine, parents can go away again. The fact they're going to the clinic doesn't mean they're all having their bits chopped about with.
It is a fascinating debate, that I'm sure will rumble on for some time. Time is against us, so we're just going to crack on to the story.